really glad to be here. I'm very honored that Dana Sue asked me to come to be able to talk a little bit about what lymphoma is, a little bit, to talk a little bit about why it's important, and third, to talk about the Bill Cruz Remission Run a little bit as well, and what we're trying to fund and begin with and continue. First of all, I don't know if anyone has the idea. I heard something about everything wasn't normal anymore. I want to make you aware that cancer is actually normal. It's actually something that's much more common than we think about, that we really realize. Just think in your mind about how often a man from birth to death develops cancer. That is to say, if you're a male, what's your chance? 1 out of how many? Anybody? 1 in 4?
1 in 2.
1 in 2. That's because he's heard me say that before. So you got the answer right. And for women, it's 1 out of 3. So this is actually a very common, normal thing to happen in life. If you live long enough, the likelihood is very high that you will develop an invasive malignancy. I'm not talking about skin cancers, which are usually something that we can handle fairly easily, but things that usually require interruption of life, interruption of normal plans, things that you're going to do. So what I want to kind of stress a little bit about in the idea, I want to get the idea across, is that this should not be as much of an interruption if you can at all avoid it. You try to live as best as you can in a normal way while you're getting treated for cancer. And it sounds kind of crazy. You've got to go out and worry about perhaps what you look like, how people will treat you, how things will look differently, how perhaps your job might be affected, perhaps other things that you might not see right so easily until you actually have to go through it. So, yeah, those days when you finally are told you're in remission and that you're going to do well, those are really good days. But they all can be good days. You just have to look for that little bit of good in each particular day. Lymphoma is actually probably the 5th most common, right now even today, about the 5th most common cancer that there is of all the invasive malignancies. If you add in Hodgkin's disease and then leukemias, it actually becomes even more common than you would think. How many people in the United States, 1 out of how many people do you think men will develop lymphoma? Any ideas? 1 out of... If we were double the numbers here, it would be, so about 1 out of 45 or so men and about 1 out of 48 women will get non-Hodgkin's lymphomas. Throw in Hodgkin's disease, which is the most common disease of malignancy of women between the ages of 20 and 30. You've got some diseases that can affect a lot of lives. Lymphomas also doesn't care about what your race or religion is. It doesn't care about how old you are. Maybe the different kinds of lymphomas that you get or the different kind of lymphoma you could get are affected by some of those features. It really doesn't care about whether you smoke. It really doesn't care about whether you've had infections. It does care about whether you're immune suppressed. That's why we worry about a little about air quality, worry about water quality. We got some of those things to worry about in the Gulf right now, don't we? And we don't have to worry very much. We don't normally think about food quality, but certainly some of those things have a lot to do with whether we become immune suppressed. So lymphomas have something to do with that, and perhaps other malignancies do as well. So first of all, the one thing that I really would like you to take away from just at least my presentation or my talk tonight is that cancer is common, and it should be considered something that actually is quite normal. And when going through treatment for it, one tries to behave as normally as possible. I often tell women, look, take the opportunity while your hair is gone to figure out what you're going to do later on, or how your hair is going to look differently, or use your creativity, your imagination to come up with a colorful scarf or something like that. And men, well, you can always pretend you're playing on a basketball team, right? So, why is lymphoma important? Well, not only can it affect anyone at any age, and it can occur rather dramatically in some cases or rather slowly in others. In fact, lymphoma is one of the slowest growing malignancies. One of the slowest growing malignancies of all is a lymphoma, and the fastest growing cancer is a lymphoma. So we have all different kinds of diseases in here that affect many different people. And in fact, one of the childhood leukemia, the most common childhood leukemia is a lymphoma, and the most common adult leukemia is also a lymphoma. So we really have to realize these things in the proper perspective. It's much more common than we think. The second thing that I really want to get across is that historically, lymphoma or hematologic research, that is to say research into hematologic malignancies, including leukemia and lymphoma both, have always led the way for research in other tumors and other malignancies. For example, radiation therapy, staging, chemotherapy. The first disease to be treated with chemotherapy that was successful was actually a leukemia. And following that, shortly after that, was Hodgkin's disease. So we're actually, in a sense, leading the way in understanding how cancer behaves, the biology of cancer, and now, even more importantly, understanding how supposedly innocent bystander cells also affect the cancer. You've got good cells in your body, and you've got some bad cells, and they either promote the development of malignancy or they can actually suppress it. And we're just now beginning to understand something about those quote-unquote innocent bystander cells. We didn't know that before. We thought they were sort of innocent and that they weren't doing anything. It didn't have any interaction with the cancer cell, and now we realize they do, and they're very important. And guess what kind of cells they are mostly? They're lymphocytes. They're hematologic cells that seem to affect it very strongly. T cells, we thought many years ago, were not so important. T lymphocytes were not so important. And it turns out that they're critical for immunity and maintaining immunity in people. We know that because of the AIDS epidemic, of course, which told us that if you don't have T cells, you not only get multiple infections, but you also get other cancers. What's strange is now that we've begun to control the HIV epidemic in some sense, and people are living longer, they're actually developing, in a sense, more cancer. Less lymphomas, but more other cancers, because they're now got normal, quote-unquote, T cells, quote-unquote, normal T cells, which actually cause these cancers to develop. So we're beginning to see more cancers in those populations. And because of that kind of research, we're beginning to understand something about how people actually not only develop cancer, but how normal cells help contribute to the progression of those malignancies. So it's really, really interesting that we've done a lot of research in lymphoma as well as in leukemia, and it has led the way to understanding something about other solid tumors.